But my name is Kerry Sautner. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at the National Constitution Center, and I'm here to help. Jeff and I switched backgrounds today, I just realized. Keeping you on your toes, people. You never know which background we will have. So we have a lot to get through today. We are live streaming and recording the class, and so we'll have this up on our website afterwards if you wanted to share it with others, or you want to join us in a future class. We will send you all the links to those pieces. If you did receive an email from me, you have those already. So thank you all very much. And without further ado, Jeff, are you ready to get started on my favorite topic, the Electoral College?
Absolutely. And how could it not be your favorite topic? Because
Right?
we're right before the presidential election and we all want to learn about this fascinating American institution.
So Jeff, I have so many questions from the students and they all really wrap around what is the Electoral College? Why did the founding fathers put it in there? Has it been tested over time? And what are some good stories behind the Electoral College working and changes to it? And then very modern today is there's always a lot of discussion and a lot of debate around the Electoral College. What are some of those discussions and debates? Sometimes our students walk in and they hear the discussion, but they don't know where the constitutional underpinnings are for those conversations. So we want to prep them today with all they need to know to join in the conversation.
Absolutely. As you said, there's so much to talk about, Kerry. And maybe the place to start is the case that the Supreme Court decided just last term in June about the Electoral College. And the question in the case, it was called Chiafalo versus State of Washington. And there was a companion case out of Colorado called Colorado Department of State against Baca. The question is, can a state punish an Electoral College elector when she casts a vote for a presidential candidate that differs from the one that actually won the popular vote in that state? And the reason that it's such an important case to kind of help us wrap our minds around the Electoral College is because if you'd ask the framers of the Constitution in 1787 whether electors could exercise independent judgment, they absolutely would have said, yes, that was the whole point of the Electoral College. But then something happened soon afterward, and it has to do with the election of 1800, that changed the conception and purpose of the Electoral College in a way that was reflected in the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. And that led to the result in the Supreme Court case. So what I want to start off by is asking our friends in the chat box, do you believe, and I'm asking you this, I'm asking for your constitutional judgment, not your political judgment. Do you think that under the Constitution, the Electoral College as written, as amended in the 12th Amendment, that a state can punish an elector who votes for a candidate other than the one he or she has been elected to vote for? The Supreme Court answered this question, and I'll tell you the Supreme Court's answer in a moment, but what do you think? If you think yes, a state can punish a faithless elector, vote yes, and if you think no, vote no. We're getting some yeses and some no's and some no's and a nice mix. Excellent, that's a good start. And you know, Kerry, we used the poll function in a town hall recently, so we should figure out how to do that too, because that would be a really cool thing to do.
Yeah, I love it, but it doesn't work on everybody's computer. So that's always a fun thing when it goes haywire.
Okay.
So just to make sure everybody knows and make sure all of our students understand, here, I have this visual here, but can you walk us through, this is the general public, this is the elector, and this is who they're voting for. Just what is an elector so they can answer that question directly?
Good question. Look at these helpful diagrams. So if here's we the people, that's the general public is we the people, we cast a ballot on election day or before if we're using mail-in voting for president. But although we put our vote next to the name of one candidate or another for president, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, in fact, we're voting for electors pledged to elect Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And that's why the second group is the so-called electors. And the electors are members of the Electoral College, and they all meet on December 26th, I think it is this year, to cast their votes for president. And the ones who are supposed to vote for Trump are supposed to vote for Trump, and the ones who are supposed to vote for Biden are supposed to vote for Biden. We have a winner take, most states have a winner take all system for electors. So say I'm a voter in Pennsylvania or California, because that's what the slide says, even better.
Or Pennsylvania, there you go, whatever one you
Whatever.
want.
18, well, we'll start with California. Either way. You can decide.
California,
Absolutely.
it's huge. Let's start there.
It's absolutely huge. Two candidates. Candidate Smith wins the popular vote, and candidate Jones loses the popular vote. California has a winner-take-all system, so Smith, who wins the popular votes, gets all of California's 55 electoral votes. That's a huge number of 55. Candidate Jones gets 0. That's why there's such an incentive to win a state. And even if Smith won by only 97 votes rather than 3 million votes, Smith would still get all the votes. So the fact that we choose to have, most states choose to have a winner-take-all system is really significant. Now, some don't. Maine and Nevada allocate their electoral votes proportionately. So in this kind of, Nebraska, forgive me, go stick with Nebraska. There we go. I want the mouse because I can decide.
I know.
All right, so in Nebraska, Smith gets 333,000 and gets 1 electoral votes. Jones wins more, gets 450, gets 4. That proportional system, which is also shared by Maine, I think, unless I messed that one up as well.
No, you're right.
Okay. Is not a winner take all and creates less of an incentive to win because the strength of your showing is reflected. So that's the gist of the way the Electoral College works. You want to go back to the Pennsylvania slide and see what we got there?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the question is, how many electoral votes do you get? You first get all of the number of representatives that you have, which is 18 in the case of Pennsylvania, plus 2 senators. So Pennsylvania, which has a lot of representatives, gets 20 electoral votes. Maine, which has very few representatives, would have a much smaller number of electoral votes, but everyone gets 2 senators. So everyone gets at least 2 electoral votes plus 1. So the lowest you can get is 3, and the most you can get is the biggest states like California and New York. Okay, questions about the way the Electoral College works before we dig into further about what its purpose is?
Yeah, I think one of the big questions that is going to come out, and you might want to answer this as we go through the process, is in the Q&A box, Carl asked, can you share your thoughts on the pros and cons of keeping the Electoral College? So we first have to understand how it works and why did they put it into place, and then understand what are the debates around it today. The split vote example in Nebraska, the question Ryan had about Nebraska, it did not seem proportional to the popular vote. Is that correct?
Let's go back to the Nebraska numbers.
I believe it's done by districts.
It's done by district, correct. Yeah. It's not a winner-take-all system, so you get the number of districts should be roughly proportional, but I think you're right that it's not exactly proportional to the popular vote because it's arranged by district. So I think that's a good point. And as for the arguments for and against the Electoral College, yes, let's end with them, because I think first we have to figure out what the original purpose of the Electoral College was. Then we have to talk about how it was changed by the 12th Amendment. And then we can ask whether it serves its original or amended purposes or any other purposes today.
Do you want to go back to that question that you asked everybody about a faithless elector?
Yes, so we had the votes, and I think I'm not going to tell you, although you can easily figure it out if you Google, but don't, because it'll be fun to sort of work through it together, what the Supreme Court said, until we've talked about what the original purpose was, and then what the amended purpose was, and then we'll answer what the Supreme Court said. So let's talk about the original purpose of the Electoral College. Is that okay, Kerry?
I love that idea because it really helps explain the pros and cons when we understand why did they come up with this idea in the first place. Do you want to start around the Constitutional Convention?
Absolutely. What a great place to start. So the Constitutional Convention, the framers are in Philadelphia, and there's a disagreement about how you should elect the president. There's a lot of fear of having a president who's too strong. Everyone is fear of having a king like George III, and the framers don't know whether they want the equivalent of a kind of patriot king who's above party, a really strong president, or a general administrator like the executive of many state governments. So the question of there's the question of how long the president's term should be and whether he should be allowed to run for re-election and impeachment or removal, but the question of how we elect the president divided into two camps. James Madison, in his Virginia plan, wanted an executive chosen by Congress to serve for a single term. Madison did not trust the people directly to elect the president. James Wilson, however, supported popular sovereignty. He wanted popular election of the president. And remember, it was James Wilson who came up with the idea that we, the people of the United States as a whole, have the sovereign power rather than we, the people of the individual states or representatives in Congress or any other body. So broadly, there was a compromise in the end, and that was the Electoral College. And the key advantage of it was that it would keep the president independent of the legislature. No one wanted the president to be in Congress's pocket. He would have his own independent base of support. But it also ensured that the people electing the president would know the candidates. And that was the main argument against popular election. It wasn't just that the framers mistrusted the people, that the people would make a bad choice. They thought America's so big, people won't know George Washington. Everyone knows George Washington, but they won't know his successors. They won't know Thomas Jefferson or John Adams, whether they're good or bad, whether they're corrupt or honest. Therefore, you want the people actually choosing the president to be able to be those who know them, know the candidates, and can exercise some independent judgment so they can choose the best people, those who are above party interest, who are not likely to be distracted by partisan considerations and will be devoted above all to the public good. So that was the basic idea. Hamilton said men chosen by the people for the special purpose of the president will be most likely to possess the information and discernment requisite to such complicated investigations. That's the basic idea, that originally the electors are just going to be really wise people with good judgments who know the candidates and will be able to exercise discernment requisite to such complicated investigations. So that's the original purpose of the Electoral College. And therefore, if we were answering the question posed in the Chiafalo case as a matter of original understanding, should a state be able to punish an elector who votes for a candidate other than the party that he's pledged to support? You'd think the answer would be no, a state can't punish an elector, because that was the whole purpose of electors, was to exercise independent judgment based on their own knowledge of the candidates and devotion to the public good. But fast forward to the election of 1800, when everything changed. Kerry, do you have another?
I do,
slide?
which is my favorite. This is my favorite election because it is like telling the best soap opera tale and it's real American history. It's very dramatic and very interesting. So this is probably why Electoral College is my favorite. But very quickly, we find out that the system that they put in place is tested. And this is the election of 1800. So Jeff, go ahead, tell us the story and what plays out.
It is an amazing story. And friends, it reminds us that we know that right now, America is more polarized than any time since the Civil War. And it's a time of extraordinary stress for all of our democratic institutions. But we have been in very stressful and challenging times before. And one of those was the election of 1800. So here's what happened. The two candidates are John Adams against Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson's running mate is Aaron Burr. You guys remember Aaron Burr from the Hamilton musical. Burr, of course, famously killed Hamilton in that duel. Why did Hamilton and Burr fight the duel in the musical? Because Burr, at the last moment of this incredibly complicated and contested election, which went to the House of Representatives, through his support, Hamilton threw his support behind Jefferson, not Burr, and Burr was so angry about this that he fought the duel that led to Hamilton's death. So there's a lot at stake in this election. Now, how did we get to that incredible point? So it's 1800, and under the original Constitution, electors cast ballots not for one presidential candidate, but for two, and the second place finisher becomes vice president. The framers don't expect that there'll be national parties that nominate candidates and offer tickets for president or vice president. They think that everyone's just going to run independently because there are no parties. And that's what happened in the first two presidential elections, 1788 and 1792, where every elector cast their first vote for George Washington, who was chosen unanimously by the Electoral College, and John Adams got the majority of the second choice votes and became vice president. But by 1796, the political parties begin to rise. The Federalists, led by Adams, and the Democratic Republicans, led by Jefferson, are opposing each other. And in 1800, it was the first time that an incumbent, Adams, is defeated in an election. The problem is that even though Jefferson outpaced Adams in the Electoral College, he tied his running mate, who was also a Democratic Republican, Aaron Burr, 73 to 73 in the Electoral College. This happened because an elector didn't do his job. To avoid a tie, all of the Democratic Republican electors are supposed to throw out one vote to ensure that Jefferson has more votes than Burr, but Burr still has enough votes to become vice president. The Democratic Republican electors forgot to do that, and as a result, the president and vice president tied. Imagine that in this election, President Trump and Vice President Pence tied in the Electoral College, or Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris. You'd have a real problem, which is exactly what happened in 1800. The original Constitution says that when no candidate gets a majority in the Electoral College, then the House of Representatives decides. And in fact, the framers originally thought that most elections would be decided in the House of Representatives because no candidate would easily get a majority because the candidates weren't well known nationally. So the election goes to the House of Representatives. The election takes place in the lame duck Congress, which is controlled by the same Federalists who the voters have just voted out of office. So it would be like a Republican Congress were choosing among Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, who have just tied. Really challenging situation. There are a lot of votes. It lasts for 6 days. There are 36 ballots before the House finally chooses Jefferson. By then, at least 2 Jeffersonian governors from Pennsylvania and Virginia threatened to call out their state militias and order them to march on the new Capitol in Washington, D.C. So there's threats of violence, like there are in some states today. But in the end, the Federalists, including key party members like Alexander Hamilton, basically concluded that Jefferson is the lesser of two evils. Hamilton doesn't like Jefferson or Burr, but he thinks Burr is worse. So he convinces several Federalists to vote for Jefferson or to abstain. Federalist James Bayard of Delaware and his allies from Vermont cast no ballots, and enough shift their votes to Jefferson to give Jefferson the election. And Jefferson is peacefully inaugurated, which sets this crucial precedent for the peaceful transfer of power. It is urgently important, friends, that we understand that in America, ever since the election of 1800, there has been a tradition that the loser of the presidential election gracefully accept the results as specified by the Constitution, and John Adams did precisely that when his own Federalist-controlled Congress chose his opponent, Thomas Jefferson, to be the president. Still, the election was so much of a mess, and no one wanted that crazy tie to happen again, that there was quick moves to reform the Electoral College, and that took place with the 12th Amendment. Curry, do we have a 12th Amendment slide?
It's already out.
You got it. Yes, proposed by Congress. 1803, sent 3 days later for ratification. Okay, what does the 12th Amendment say? Well, the gist of it is that electors in the future still cast 2 votes, but one of the 2 votes is for president and the other is for vice president. So there's no possibility, again, of a tie for president. The 12th Amendment also specifies that the House, in the event of no Electoral College majority, would choose a president from the top 3, not 5 electoral vote getters, and the Senate would choose a vice president from the top 2 electoral vote getters. Sound complicated? Yes, it is complicated. We have not had a situation where the Senate has had to choose a vice president since the 12th Amendment was passed. So now you have a different sense of the purpose of the Electoral College. By the time the 12th Amendment is passed, the framers of the amendment take for granted the existence of political parties. They assume that the purpose of the Electoral College is to implement faithfully the will of the voters who are voting for leaders of a particular political party. That's why they ensure that the president and vice president are voted for separately. And that, according to the US Supreme Court, changed the meaning of the Electoral College. Although its original purpose had been to exercise independent judgment, by the time of the 12th Amendment, the purpose was merely to implement the will of the parties and to carry out the results of the election as the voters had specified. And for that reason, the US Supreme Court, in the Chiafalo case, drumroll, unanimously held that, yes, the states may punish a faithless elector, because according to the 12th Amendment, let's go back to the text.
You got it. Do you want part two?
No, I think that, let's go back to part one. The 12th Amendment basically implicitly assumes that people are going to be voting for president and vice president based on their party affiliation, and therefore state legislatures, and it's the section of the Constitution that specifies the election of state legislatures, and I wonder if we can find that quickly. Basically, once state legislatures have decided about how they want to appoint their electors, then they have plenary authority to force the electors to carry out their will. And that is what the Supreme Court held. And in fact, in later elections, different state legislatures noted that they could play their role in different times. Article 2 does not place any limits on the state legislature's choice of the electoral method, but grants the state broad authority over the manner of awarding their electors. And in a case called McPherson versus Blacker, an important case involving the Electoral College, that was a Michigan law that set up a new system of choosing presidential electors. One elector is chosen by an election within each of the state's congressional districts, and two are chosen from statewide at-large districts. Michigan voters challenged the law, arguing that it violated Article 2 of the Constitution, which they said required a state to appoint a body as a unit and not delegate the authority to subdivisions. And the Supreme Court disagreed. They said state legislatures have basically total control, and they can they can require their electors to be appointed and to act however they please. Chief Justice Fuller said the Constitution does not provide that the appointment of electors shall be by popular vote, nor that the elector shall be voted for upon a general ticket, the winner-take-all rule, or that a majority of those who exercise the elective franchise can alone choose the electors. That's the people. It recognizes that the people act through their representatives in the legislature, and leaves it to the legislature exclusively to define the method of effecting the object. In short, the appointment and mode of appointment of electors belong exclusively to the states under the Constitution of the United States. So that was the case and the text that the Supreme Court in the Chiafalo case relied on when they said state legislatures can appoint presidential electors however they please, and can in fact punish faithless electors.
Got it. So you can't change the fact that a faithless elector could vote differently than they're supposed to and are deemed to, but you can punish them because of the 12th Amendment. This is what the court came down last year in the case. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, the 12th Amendment and Article 2 of the original Constitution, which gives state legislatures the power to appoint electors as they please.
Got it. So, okay, so totally understand now. We go from a popular vote of the people who are able to vote to the electors to the president. Now, I guess the other question is not just where do we get these numbers from, because we did discuss that, how the numbers are about, but why did they pick this system? Because it does seem pretty complicated, but why do we have, and that maybe that gets to the modern question as well, is why isn't it just a direct vote? Why do we have this system in place? What are the pros and cons around that argument?
Well, I think, as you said, in terms of why they picked it, they needed some kind of compromise between popular and congressional election. Originally, they came up with this idea of independent electors, and then that changed after the election of 1800. Should we have it today? Let me You know what? I do want to just read that language from Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, because if you want to check it out on the Interactive Constitution, you can learn more. It says each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. And the Supreme Court said that each state has plenary power to do what it likes. You know, that could be relevant, friends, in some of the hypotheticals people are thinking about in connection with this upcoming presidential elections. Some scholars are wondering, what if a state legislature, convinced that the mail-in ballots are not reliable, decides to recall its electors and take it upon itself to certify the election in favor of one candidate rather than another? Can a state legislature, having originally decided to delegate its system to electors, take the power back? That's an undecided constitutional question. Hopefully it won't come to that, because it would raise a novel emergency question, but it's a fascinating one to think about.
And
All right.
Julie has a complementary question to that is, so if electors vote faithlessly and it changes the outcome of the election, does it hold?
If electors vote faithlessly and it changes the outcome, elector does it hold? It would, theoretically, because it's the electors who elect the president, not the people. The results of the Electoral College determine the election. However, Lindsay, it's a great question. Over the course of history, you'll find the exact number in the Chiafalo decision. I don't have it to mind, but only a tiny handful of electors have ever been faithless. It's something like 8 or something like that, or 12. It's a very small number. And therefore, none of the changes have come close to swinging the election. In the last presidential election in 2016, there were some supporters of Hillary Clinton who were trying to persuade Clinton electors to vote for Trump in order to deny either candidate a majority. No, I'm sorry. I think to throw away their vote, basically, to vote for forgive me. They were trying to persuade Clinton electors to vote for third-party candidates so that no candidate would get a majority and the question would be decided by the House of Representatives. That didn't go anywhere. But in the end, however the electors vote is decisive, and no electors have come close to switching the election.
And now the questions are rolling in, so I'm going to ask you a couple more. So Susan's class wanted to understand, what kind of fine are we talking about? So the fines for being faithless, are they pretty minor? Are they stronger? They're not jail time, but they're just a fine. So can you clarify? I believe the average was around $1,000, but Jeff, can you kind of clarify kind of what level of fine that is?
That's exactly right, Kerry. Great memory of the fine. I'm now reading from the Chiafalo case.
Sorry.
Three Washington
I'm
electors.
pretty sure you were right on 8. It's only been like 8. It's been very few, and they were all around one particular election years and years ago. So I think sometimes we hear about these cases and we get worried, and then we look at the reality of it and say, like, this isn't normal. The system is set up and people respect the system, but we still want to talk about, if it does happen, what's the constitutional game plan?
Absolutely. This is the Chiafalo case, and there the state fined these 3 Washington electors $1,000 apiece for breaking their pledges to support the same candidate the voters have. Friends, I know it's no fun to have extra homework during virtual learning, but if you feel inspired,
we'll give you more.
just check out, after we talk, the Chiafalo case. You'll find it at supremecourt.gov really fast. It's really interesting because it's a unanimous decision. All 9 justices joined it, and it'll give you the history of the Electoral College and how things changed. And plus, it's written by Justice Elena Kagan, and she's an extremely lively writer. She's writing directly to us, and she has some great lines in it, including she tells the story of the election of 1800 in a much even, really lively way. And she, well, you know what? I won't give it away, but she has some zingers. And if you read it through, it's really clear, I promise. You'll laugh out loud. And if you find a line that you think is really funny, then email me and Kerry and tell me which of Justice Kagan's lines you thought was the best zinger, because it's really great. So that's the Chiafalo case. Kerry, should we talk about the arguments for and against the Electoral College today?
I think that's huge, because so often it feels like you walked into the party late and you know that they're debating something and you understand it, but you really don't want to understand, what are they saying on both sides? What are the pros and cons on the constitutional question around the Electoral College? So I put up a map with the numbers so we can look at places like DC and South Dakota and Pennsylvania and California and understand when we're talking about votes and representation, how this plays a part in the conversation.
Absolutely. So this is a really interesting debate, and it's a really important debate uh, because it has big implications. We now have uh, in the election of 2016, as in the election of 2000, we had two recent elections where the loser of the popular vote has become president because he won the Electoral College. So the question of why we have the Electoral College is obviously relevant. The best summary of the arguments on both sides was in a great podcast and program the National Constitution Center did with the scholars Jesse Wegman, who has a new book out called Let the People Choose, which I would say is one of the best cases against retaining the Electoral College, and James Caesar of the University of Virginia, who made a very strong case for retaining the Electoral College. And you can find that podcast on the National Constitution Center's Interactive Constitution, and it's part of our We the People podcast library. But I'll try really quickly to summarize the big arguments on both sides. So the arguments against retaining the Electoral College are obviously first that it's undemocratic. It's not fair to have a system repeatedly where the loser of the popular vote becomes president. The second argument is that it is gives much too much power to a handful of swing states and concentrates the entire campaign in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Florida. Basically, the reliably red and reliably blue states, like New York and California for the blue side, and Kansas and Nebraska for the red side, don't have a lot of undecided voters. And because of our winner-take-all system, there's no incentive for the candidates to look for votes there. Instead, they have to put all of their efforts on this handful of swing states that can swing the election. And that means that the rest of the states never get to hear from the candidates. And the opponents of the Electoral College note that it was so accepted that it made no sense as late as 1970 that Birch Bayh in Congress proposed a constitutional amendment supported by both parties, by President Nixon and by the leading Democrats. And it came within only 3 votes of passing the Senate and was stopped only by Southern Democrats who were part of small states and wanted to maintain their power to have a disproportionate influence on the election because the Electoral College gives every state at least 2 electoral votes, even no matter how big a population they have. So that's a good reminder that as recently as 1970, Congress was in a hair's breadth of proposing a bipartisan constitutional amendment, and had it been proposed, it might well have been ratified according to the polls at the time. So those are the main arguments against the Electoral College. The arguments in favor of the Electoral College are it maintains federalism. If we didn't have the Electoral College, then you'd have candidates campaigning exclusively in the most populous states like New York, California, and Texas. They would never visit or care about the states with less population like Kansas and Nebraska or Rhode Island. And therefore, the Electoral College ensures that we have national campaigns in which all states are attended to. I have to share the counter argument to that, which is that that's really not the case, that we don't have a national campaign. We have a campaign concentrated on swing states. And because of the winner-take-all system, there's no incentive to campaign anywhere else. The opponents of the Electoral College say if we had a popular vote system, candidates would have an incentive to look for votes everywhere because there are no purely red or blue states. You saw that Texas, for example, is called a purple state, which could flip blue or stay red. But both candidates would obviously have an incentive to spend a lot of time in Texas because they want to get every single vote everywhere that they can. The other thing that the opponents of the Electoral College say is that the real problem is not the Electoral College, but the winner-take-all system, which is not mandated by the Constitution. And if more states chose to follow the example of Maine and Nevada, then we would have a system which was less likely to have a dissonance between the popular and electoral vote victory. The final thing I'll say, and I'm not doing fair summaries to the arguments on all sides. I want you to listen to the podcast for that. You may ask, what's the alternative to the Electoral College? Obviously, one is a constitutional amendment, but you all know how hard it is to pass a constitutional amendment. And nowadays, that at least the red states think that the Electoral College might ensure the winner of Republican candidates. That was not the case in 1970, but it is today. It's extraordinarily unlikely that 2/3 of both houses of Congress would propose an amendment to the Electoral College, or that 3/4 of the states would adopt it, because right now it's become a partisan issue, which it wasn't until recently. The alternative is called the National Electoral Vote Compact. And essentially, it's an agreement where states agree by compact to give all of their electoral votes to the winner of the popular vote in their state. So let's say that to the winner of the popular vote in the country as a whole. I just completely didn't state precisely what the purpose of this is. The National Electoral Vote Compact would say every state agrees that they will give all of their electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. So in California, if Donald Trump lost in the state of California but won the popular vote nationally, California would pledge in advance to give its electoral votes to Donald Trump so that the people's will nationally could rule. In order for that national compact to go into effect, a majority of states would have to agree to join it. So far, I don't know, something like 12 states have agreed. It's not an immediate hair's breadth of being adopted. It's conceivable it might. There's a question of whether it's permissible under the Constitution for the states to agree to a compact that's not approved by Congress, which has to approve compacts between the states. Some say yes, some say no. But in practice, this compact is the most likely immediate way for the winner of the popular vote to become the president.
I think that's actually a really good summary. We're a little bit close to out of time, but two questions that came in the Q&A box. That's one option of things that could change, because again, we're looking at federalism. We're looking at the fact that the states are allowed to, following the Constitution, play this out the way they want to. Both Carl and Joe wanted to understand kind of where the conversation is around states like Maine and Nebraska that are putting into place district voting. So then it's more proportional with the state, even though Nebraska not exactly, but also I know Maine is doing ranked choice voting. So there's a lot of other kind of lower level options in there. And I think Carl and Joe's question is, are those conversations happening? Because I know there's 48 states like California that are winner take all. And so we're looking at 2 that are using kind of some kind of split electoral system. So how much energy do we see by saying letting the states bubble up their ideas in different ways have we been seeing in the last, say, 10 years?
There has been great energy. Ranked choice voting is an excellent example of a system that does not allow a third-party candidate like the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or any party to throw the election to one candidate rather than another. Under ranked choice voting, the candidate who doesn't get the most votes, if no one gets a majority, the top 2 candidates proceed to the next round, and the third-party candidates are distributed to one of the top choices, and that is a better way of avoiding spoiler elections. There is some experimentation. It's just unfortunate in our polarized time. States are really digging in their heels about this winner-take-all system because they believe and it's almost a coincidence, given the statistical closeness of these elections, that Republican candidates won the Electoral College in 2016 and 2000. It could just as well have gone the other way. In 2004, many people thought that John Kerry, the Democratic candidate, would lose the popular vote but win the Electoral College. So, but for now, experimentation has been slightly stymied by the fact that this has become a partisan issue.
So I think that it's an amazing way to wrap it up, not with the word stymie, but the idea that when we have these constitutional conversations, there's a lot of pieces in play: the history, the changes over time with amendments, and then the conversation today, and even the conversation of whose job is it, and what kind of authority do the states have? Does the national government have? So I think you really kind of gave all the students a lot to kind of work with, grapple around. I put the link of the podcast in the chat, but I'm going to give everybody homework, adult students as well as younger students, in the chat today and in the class today. Have a conversation with somebody else, over dinner or over a snack or on FaceTime tonight, and have a conversation about what is the system, what is the constitutional questions, and what's my state doing? Because you want to start with knowing and understanding what your state is doing and why they're doing it, and then have that national conversation. So Jeff, any wrapping words, any big ideas we should walk away with?
No, that's great. And I'll just add, if you want to really get
More
into the
homework.
National Constitution Center spirit, listen to the podcast or look at the interactive constitution and have a little debate about, should we retain the Electoral College and do it, assign sides? Because again, there are decent arguments on both sides and they're not totally familiar. So inform yourself before you have it. Do it over dinner and see if your mind changes based on putting the arguments on the table. And then for extra credit, remember the homework, read the Chiafalo decision. I promise you'll find some great zingers from Justice Kagan. And if you find a line you really love, then email Kerry or me and tell me what it is.
Or tag us and tweet it out, because we love to see it on Twitter too. So that's really fun.
Yeah, great.
Okay, great. Thank you guys. What a great class. And I hope we're all prepared.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.